This video contains main story spoilers for FF14 Heavensward. The nation of Ishgard of the 7th Astral Era. Every one of its citizens knows who King Thordan the Seventh was, as well as the knights of the Heavensward under his command. The tradition of a king and the warding knights ended with them, after they were slain while invoking primal summoning magic, in vain efforts to gain power. Just as infamous in the minds of the Ishgardian people is the tales and legends of the king and knights who started this tradition long ago. This was before the Dragonsong War, when peace between man and dragon was still firm. In this video, we scroll back the pages of the encyclopedia, accessing all the information we have about King Thordan the First and his Knights 12. A central figure in its establishment was the visionary figure by the name of Thordan. According to legend, Thordan was one day visited by the goddess Halone of the 12. She bid Thordan to lead the Elysian people north, into the mountains of the highlands of Coertus. There, they would find the Promised Land. Thus did they travel north, with Thordan and his Knights 12 leading the way. The journey was hard, but finally they arrived at the land where the city of Ishgard would be built. As he and his people set to work building what is now the Steps of Faith, they were set upon by a large and powerful dragon, with dark scales and menacing horns on his head. This massive worm, known as Nidhogg, set upon these people with fire and claw. Thordan and his Knights 12 defended the steps, in a battle that lasted 7 days, all on the edge of the great chasm where the steps were being built. On that 7th day, many of Thordan's knights lay dead, while others were tempered by the great Wyrm. Robbed of their allegiance, these enthralled knights turned on King Thordan and pushed him into the chasm. It was at this point that Haldrath, member of the Knights 12 and son of the king, took up his father's fallen spear, and together with those knights that remained themselves, renewed their attack. Haldrath used his spear to pry out one of Nidhogg's eyes, in an act that caused the worm to flee the battlefield. Haldrath and the remaining knights were victorious, but this victory came at great cost. King Thordan the First was dead, as were all but Haldrath and 4 of the Knights 12. Haldrath would have become king if he so wished, but he declined his father's crown. Instead, he made a vow that as the Azure Dragoon, he would hunt down any dragonkin that would threaten his people. After this event, the 4 knights that remained would go on to found the city and nation of Ishgard, with each founding a high house to rule, alongside a newly established Orthodox church. The heads of the state would now be the archbishops, served loyally by the 12 knights who came to be known as the Heavensward. This point in history not only marked Ishgard's founding, but also the beginning of the Dragonsong War. A war that would last over 1,000 years, and only ended recently. In memory of King Thordan the First and his Knights 12, the nation of Ishgard grew and endured. However, its people were now locked into a never-ending conflict with dragonkind, a war that its citizens believed was just and true. Right now you may be thinking, this isn't what I remember about the Dragonsong War. And you're correct. The story I just told you is false. This is the tale that was taught to all citizens of Ishgard. Every schoolchild learned of it in their studies, and it was preached in churches and places of worship. For over 1,000 years this lie was spun, a lie to cover up the crimes of one king and his 12 knights. Now we tell the true tale, of the true King Thordan the First and his Knights 12. We turn back the pages of the encyclopedia, past the scripture and dogma to the year 350 of the 6th Astral Era, roughly 1200 years ago, 200 years before the false tale. During this age, the 6th Astral Era was young. Eorzea was still feeling the effects of the calamity of water, which we know now was the result of a rejoining of the source with a reflection aspected to water. Long story very short, this calamity caused massive tidal waves that washed over Eorzea, ending many established nations in the process. Seeking new lands to put down roots, a clan of Elezen would make the journey north into the lands of Coertus, which at the time was uninhabited by the races of Eorzea. Scholars have conflicting opinions as to the reason for this migration. Some believe it was mainly to escape the calamity-struck Eorzea in lands of higher elevation. Others attribute the Elezen migration to the large-scale immigration of Hyur into Eorzea in the wake of this calamity. Whatever the reason, these Elezen would journey far and arrive in the region near the Highlands and Sea of Clouds. However, while not settled by mortal kind, this region did have one landlord, that being Dragonkind. Specifically, the broods of Hreysvelgr, Nidhogg and Ratatoskr. At first, interactions were met with conflict. The Elezen were not deterred, however, and set up encampments, laying the first foundations for the formation of a new nation. As time went on, both sides were still wary of each other, until a fateful encounter with a young Elezen and a Wyrm of the First Brood. Hreysvelgr and an Elezen woman known as Shiva would strike an unusual friendship in the heat of all this conflict, which quickly blossomed into love. Through their bond, both sides would enter a calm and fine understanding. However, fate would not have a kind ending for them under natural circumstances. He being a long-lived Wyrm, and she a mortal Elezen, they knew their time together would not last, with time having the last word. And so, one day Shiva went to Hreysvelgr with a single request that would change everything. She asked him to devour her, so that her soul would be entwined with his, so that they would be together for all eternity. This single act of love and sacrifice inspired an alliance between both their races, with peace and prosperity that lasted for centuries. 200 years after Shiva's sacrifice, in the year 550, the city-state of Ishgard would be built and their nation founded. After the city of Ishgard was built, its king was Thordan, first of his name. Serving him was an order of knights, known as the Knights 12. It was during his rule that the peace brought about by Shiva and Hreysvelgr's bond would be shattered. One day, King Thordan learned a secret about Dragonkind. The secret being that the source of the dragon's power lay within their eyes, with the eyes of Wyrms like those of the First Brood being especially powerful. The king began to covet this great power, and by extension, so did his Knights 12. How did King Thordan learn of this great secret about Dragonkind, you may be wondering? This answer is a familiar one. Ascians. In true Ascian fashion of meddling in the affairs of nations, the Ascians whispered in Thordan's ear, revealing his dragon ally's secrets, all while manipulating the king's mortal greed and desire. It didn't take long for Thordan and his knights to act. They departed Ishgard and made for the Churning Mists, inviting Ratatoskr to an audience. Together, they ambushed her from all sides. Taken by surprise and with none of her brood there to aid her, she was unable to resist their onslaught and was thus slain by her attackers. Thordan and the knights then pried out both of her eyes and gorged themselves upon them, fully absorbing their essence and gaining power themselves. Nidhogg bore witness to this scene and it drove him mad with rage. He thus descended upon his sister's murderers, determined to avenge Ratatoskr. This echoes the tale of the scriptures, except Nidhogg didn't temper the knights, nor did they kill King Thordan by pushing him into a chasm. Even with the power they had gained, Nidhogg was a powerful foe. King Thordan was slain, as were 4 of the Knights 12. 8 of them then remained standing, which included Haldrat, the Azure Dragoon and son of the king. Together, they assaulted Nidhogg once more, and were able to pry out both of his eyes. Nidhogg, now greatly weakened without his eyes, yet still wanting for revenge, had no choice but to flee. As the knights tended to their wounds and cared for the bodies of their fallen, Haldrat came forth with both of Nidhogg's eyes in hand. By all rights, the crown and rule of Ishgard could have passed to Haldrath. He, however, felt great shame in the acts he had committed, and the lives it had cost. Haldrath refused the crown, instead choosing to depart with Nidhogg's eyes, on a journey to repent for his sins. 3 of the Knights 12 also departed, feeling similar regret for their actions, and shame for the war they had doomed their nation to fight. This left 4 knights remaining to decide a course of action. These 4, Knights Fortum, Halinair, Durindir and Zamail, would return to Ishgard and shape their nation into what it would be for the next 1,000 years, all while consigning the bitter truth of their betrayal to forgotten pages of history, thanks in part to the Church. The identities of many of these knights continue to be unknown even today, long after the truth came to light. This truth came after the revelation of these knights absorbing the power of Radatoskr's eyes, which forever changed their blood and the bloodlines of all that would follow them. Should any citizen with this legacy ever drink dragon's blood, they would transform into a draconic servant themselves. The only named members of this order are those of Haldrat and the 4 lords of the high houses of Ishgard. The rest were deliberately forgotten. Some of the only evidence that they lived stands in Ishgard today at the last vigil, with statues dedicated to each knight and King Thordan the First. We do, however, know what one of them decided to do after these events. The brawny knight who first departed the company commented that,
"I would wash my hands of blood and betrayal, and take up an honest trade. Mayhap I shall serve ale instead of sharpened steel."
This knight returned to Ishgard and founded a pub called the Forgotten Knight. Gibralond, the pub's landlord, states that he once served Ishgard, took his wounds and finally hung up his shield. Turns out the founder of this pub did the same thing, and uttered the same quote we saw due to the echo.
"Mayhap I shall serve ale instead of sharpened steel."
Gibralond also remarked that the knight wished to be forgotten, hence the name. I personally thought that the broken knight statue outside was the inspiration for the name. How happy was I to learn the truth. But the question still remains. Who were these knights? What were their names and what happened to the rest of them? The truth is, we don't actually know. The Church covered up the truth very well, with the identities of the Knights 12 being all but forgotten, except for Haldrat and the Knights of the High Houses. Others, like the first landlord of the Forgotten Knight, chose to be forgotten. Given that Radatoskr's legacy lives on in the blood of Ishgard's citizens to such an extent, It's likely these knights still remained as part of Ishgardian society, and thus their bloodlines were passed down, likely in the lowborn of Ishgard. As for Haldrat, his remaining days were spent in service of Ishgard from afar, helping to defend it from the Dravanian horde's reprisals in the early days of the Dragonsong War. Due to the eyes he kept in his possession, he was corrupted and consumed by their power and passed away. He was buried in secret along with one of the eyes, the other being passed along the line of Azure Dragoons. As a result of the eye's power, his body never decayed, and would be used along with the eye by Thordan the Seventh to achieve his God King primal status. His body and the eye would be forged into the sword that Thordan would wield.
A god who knows not cessation, whose being is sustained by a millennium of fervent prayer, and the eye's nigh bottomless reservoir of ether.
Thordan's transformation into God King Thordan was done by summoning the memory of Thordan the First along with the faith of Ishgard. A similar process was performed by the Heavensward, with each member invoking the spirits of the Knights 12 to gain power.
Brothers, the time has come to call upon the true power of the Heavensward.
It's likely that they didn't summon the true souls from the ethereal sea, more likely incarnations similar to Ygale's summoning of the images of Saint Shiva. With Ishgard having already taken steps into its new future of peace, maybe one day soon the identities of these knights will be revealed, but it's likely this knowledge is buried hidden in the archives of Ishgard. And that is the tale of King Thordan the First and his Knights 12. Thanks for watching, everyone. Leave a comment with your opinion on the subject and also hit that like button to give support to this video. The story and legend of the Knights 12 has always been a favourite of mine. It's a shame we never learned who the rest of these knights were, but given the events surrounding them and their crimes, maybe some things are best left in the past and forgotten.
Fare thee well, my brother knights, my loyal friends.
Thank you so much, and now, as always, have a good one.